Today is Saturday, which means it's time for a Saturday project. This video, I'm going to actually discuss how I went about building a monitor stand for my desk at work. I know this is actually, I did this project before the whole quarantine and coronavirus situation, but it's still relevant because I'm still having to go to the office on occasion to do some work. That being said, I'm going to discuss this. Let's get into it. All right. So to start off with this project, obviously you need some wood to build the monitor stand with. And I went with, I believe it was, I first had to measure the base of the monitors itself. And the base was roughly about the size of my hand, which was like 6 inches. So I went up a step. And so obviously you can get a wood in like increments of 2 inches, so 1 by 2, 1 by 4, 1 by 6, and so forth. So I went with a 1 by 8 piece of wood for this particular project, and it was just basically it's the same material that you use to make the closet shelving or just a basic shelving material. So nothing fancy. And now if you are particular about the type of wood that you use, you can go get the oak or the cedar or whatever the case may be. I wasn't that particular about it, so I just got a piece of wood and I was able to get it. I had to do the dimensions. And if you look at the monitors, so I have a two monitor setup. Each one of these monitors is 21 inches in width. And so 21 and 21 means 42. And I wanted a little bit of overhang beyond that. So I think I measured 42. I think I measured it to be 48 inches, which is 4 feet. So it's 4 feet across. And then I built the vertical supports, and I'm gonna get into that as well. Some other things that you'll need for this project, you will need some wood stain, maybe even a polyurethane to protect the wood itself once you apply the stain. And I also use pocket screws on here, the Craig pocket screws, so that I can make the holes in here as need be. All right, so once you cut them off, to be able to make my vertical supports the same height, I lined the bottom ends up together and then I flushed off the top sides so that they were exactly the same height. Sometimes when you cut, you may put your mark here, but if your line is slightly off, then when you go to cut, you may get some unevenness. So I did it this way, worked perfectly fine. All right, the next step, although this picture is relatively blurry, I did cut the pocket holes here and I was testing it out and I kind of made a little bit of a mistake on one of the pieces, so I had to go back and correct it. But I did put pocket holes in on these are the verticals as you see right here, and this is the horizontal support that goes across, and then I have another vertical on this end. I'm also using some corner clamps to make sure that the corner is at a right angle. And what you can't really see here is that well, I've actually already had done it at this particular step, but I used a scrap piece of the 1 by 8 or 1 by 10 to be able to inset this vertical piece back. If you can kind of see down here in this particular corner, you'll notice that this piece of going across does not meet the very end of this piece going up and down, and that's because of the spacing that I put there before I secured them together. As far as the pocket holes go, I use the standard recommendation that was made that Craig makes for them, and they recommend 2 holes for every, I believe it's 2 inches or every 3 inches or something like that nature. So I went with that standard. All right, once I got everything assembled, I also used glue in between the pieces, some wood glue. So as you see here, the top is glued to the vertical supports as well as the front horizontal support. And to I didn't have big enough clamps that would clamp from the top of the shelf to the bottom. And so what I did is I just stacked a bunch of paint cans on top of it and let it sit overnight. This did the job, pretty well for what I was doing. But if you do have the clamps, I would suggest using the clamps that you would need. All right, and here's a different angle of the clamps. So I was able to get the clamps on the backside across the vertical support and the top, but not from the actual full length of the full length vertical to the top. It was not long enough. All right, the next thing I did was to apply stain. And this is a Minwax product that has a stain and polyurethane mixed in together. And so I applied it and it went on pretty smooth. The only problem that I had was that it didn't look like as well as I thought it would when it came out. And maybe it could have been just how I went about doing things. Like I followed the instructions on the can of how to go about applying it and so forth, but it didn't turn out as great as I would hope it would. But it is, it does look well. As you see, the grain is popping out here, pretty well. So you can make out that it has been stained and so forth. One other thing I wanted to mention, that before I stained it, I did use a sander to round off the sharp edges of the, various pieces of wood. In hindsight, though, when it comes to staining, I would have, for any future projects, I will make it a habit to actually stain the wood first before assembling it. And the reason being is because I had some runs on the wood from where, like, I applied the stain, and as it dried, it ran down the surface of the board, and so you can see those runs on there. And this is the final part before I completed everything. So I let it dry for maybe 2 or 3 days. Even after drying for those 2 or 3 days in the garage, once I took it to the office, it still had a smell from the stain and the polyurethane on it. So I would recommend probably letting it sit for at least a week in an open area to kind of get rid of all the fumes and stuff off of it. And again, this is the final product of it being assembled at the office with the two monitors on top. One thing, as a kind of a lesson learned from this particular project, I wish I had built it a little bit taller. As you see, I have the monitor that I normally take, my work computer, is not able to stand completely up. Like the screen is not able to stand completely up. So I could use it as possibly like a third screen. And, I measured it tall enough to be able to get like my work phone underneath there and maybe, a couple other things under there, but not tall enough that the laptop itself could fit under there with the screen open. But overall, I did enjoy this project. It was fairly simple piece of project to do. Nothing too complex. I don't think that, if you just really have like a saw, you can use I used the miter saw, but even if you don't have a miter saw, you can use a circular saw for this particular project. And you may have to use like a square or something to make sure your ends are straight. But it did work. Very few tools needed. So if you have any questions for this, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section below. If you've done some woodworking of your own or have your own monitor stand that you built, I would love to see pictures of it. You can tag me in those pictures on Instagram and Twitter. My name is almost ENGR on those two sites. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out about those. And last but not least, please check out my website, thealmostengineer.com, where I may have some more details on this particular project that you can read up on. The link to the website will be down in the description below. Until next time, peace out.